Paul gives Timothy instructions that all church leaders should be men of one wife. So does it mean that the congregation or the people who go to church and they don't have a position in church or a leadership position are allowed to marry more than one wife?
I'd have to ask like what the context is about that. You know what I mean? Like so you'd have to ask, husband of one wife, does that mean one wife at one time? Does, you know, so obviously probably a bad idea for a polygamist to be leading a church. Although I have heard of certain mission societies in America allowing for such things if within an African context, because I don't think it's as prominent in Kenya as it is in other countries in Africa, but polygamy is still a real thing, like a cultural thing that people practice, and so they would be like, well, you know, we'll allow for some nuance. But yeah, I don't know. I think whenever you see Jesus define marriage, he seems to define it as one man leaves his family, a woman leaves her family, they meet together, elope, and that constitutes what a family is. And God hates divorce, and that's pretty clear all throughout Scripture. Now, I think the nuance in this is, and then I'll let Danson take it from there, is that what if somebody is married, and I've known people like this in the States, and their wife was unfaithful to them and left them, or what if they, you know, cheated on their husband, or, you know, is something like that, and then they left the husband did everything he could to reconcile the marriage, and then it couldn't happen, and so does that disqualify him from the pastorate because, you know, it was really her fault? Like, so I think that's an instance to where we could allow for some grace, you know, in that instance. And also another instance we could allow for some grace is what happens if a man was married before he was saved and then gets divorced for whatever stupid reason, and then, I mean, is his sins not absolved whenever he gets born again? I mean, like, God's forgotten his past. So should we hold his past against him, you know? Now, the other argument for that is, on the other side of it, there are people that are very hard about this, that the marriage covenant, whether you're a sinner or a saint, is before God. And so there's obviously going to be some churches that totally disagree with what I just said. But that's been the position that I've kept for, after I thought through this, gosh, what was that? Maybe 5-6 years ago. Yeah, so I've thought about that issue since then. That's the point. That's the conclusion that I've drawn.
Okay. Yeah. I think the question behind that question is, does God permit for polygamy? Polygamy. Yes. And we have to be very careful at how we read the Bible. Just because we see polygamy in the Old Testament does not mean that's how God required things to happen, right? When Jesus Christ is interpreting this to his audience between Matthew 5 and 7, he makes it very clear that the reason why polygamy was permitted in the time of Moses was because of the sinfulness of those people. So we don't want to follow patterns just because we see them in the Bible. We want to carry what is the overriding command. So for example, when the questioner is referring to 1 Timothy, the idea in 1 Timothy 3 is not what God is permitting or what God is not permitting. It is what God is requiring. He is requiring that this person be a one woman man. What does
meaning there can be
meaning there's so many people who want, and this is the context of adultery. This is not an idea of polygamy here. This is a man who has the characteristic of being faithful to his wife. That's number one. Number two, a man who has the characteristic of being faithful to one wife. So God is setting a standard for the church, and the standard is monogamy, not polygamy.
So are you trying to say that this scripture has been misunderstood?
Exactly, yes. The same way I would say love life does not mean the opposite is, well, I say a leader should be able to love life, or should be able to defend the rights of life. It doesn't mean the ones who are not leaders should be murderers, right? So the same way you're saying the leader should have one wife does not mean the followers should have, because the leader is a reflection of what God is requiring of everyone. Yes,
I think it's also important to understand what culture was Timothy ministering in. And when you interpret scripture, you have to look at the grammatical context, what does the original language say, and you have to look at the historical context. What was this letter, what church was this letter written to? Timothy was the pastor of the church of Ephesus. Ephesus was notoriously a sex-driven culture. They had the sex cult Diana of the Ephesians. They had temple prostitutes there that they used to worship her. And so what Paul is doing is raising the Christian standard of protecting who women are. I mean, Christianity was really good at this in the ancient world. It really set a high standard for the protection of women's rights, and simultaneously defending what marriage is, because who knows what kind of culture what kind of marriage culture there was in Ephesus at that time. So Timothy was a pastor he was kind of the deacon over Ephesus in a sense. So that was what was going on there too. So, and that's just a lesson for anytime you're interpreting scripture. It's good to look at that historical background and say, like, what was this letter written to, and how does that talk to us today?
All right.
96.9 FM, Pearl Radio.